For 2 centuries, confinement was strictly geographic. The unit of punishment was a room built from concrete, measured in square footage, and secured by steel. Over the last 15 years, correctional systems have moved thousands of people out of these rooms. Enforced isolation is being replaced by digital tablets, community supervision, and remote behavioral monitoring. In Chicago, a parallel scientific effort is developing ways to embed thousands of sensors in human tissue. The goal is to make the interior of the body continuously legible, tracking molecular signals to identify and manage disease. These 2 projects, prison reform and biological measurement, operate on a shared technical requirement. Both rely on an ambient measurement layer to render a subject's internal state or external behavior as a stream of actionable data. The success of decarceration moved the perimeter of the prison into the open world. Distributed custody functions as an administrative status. Confinement follows the person through the streets, occurring as a set of digital conditions rather than a physical location. This risk governance operating system controls subjects by continuously scoring their performance. It modulates how a person may move by dynamically throttling access to housing, employment, and credit. This architecture requires no central conspiracy. It emerges wherever multiple independent institutions, from courts to banks to social workers, share the same grammar of risk assessment. We can map this architecture. Here is the blueprint. At the center is a single human subject, standing in the blank space where physical walls used to be. To see how the modern state controls a population without walls, we must tear down old mechanics of punishment and build the invisible prison, layer by layer. First, the system requires a new metric for punishment. Historically, the universal unit of justice was time, a determinate quantity imposed on the public record and finite by simple arithmetic. Modern actuarial penology replaces the calendar with behavioral change. Under dosage probation, the length of a sentence is determined by the specific hours of intervention required to lower a subject's computed risk score. This diagram illustrates the substitution. On the left is the static calendar. On the right, the new metric relies on dynamic criminogenic needs, variables like employment status or social associations. In engineering terms, these are control surfaces. The state can monitor them and measure the subject's capacity to bear the return of their liberty. Liberty becomes a commodity that must be continually earned against an algorithmic threshold. By removing the neutral calendar, the state ensures that punishment only ends when a proprietary model decides the subject's behavioral risk is low enough. Every scored subject begins as a collection of scattered records. Before any algorithm can generate a risk tier, the subject must be mathematically assembled from fragments. This is the work of entity resolution. Disparate data points, a booking photo, a dismissed eviction, an old utility bill, are linked through probabilistic matching into a single master person index. Commercial data brokers and consumer reporting agencies supply the portability spine for this data. They standardize these claims about persons, making them retrievable for purchase or algorithmic processing across any domain. The data generated about the subject is highly portable, able to cross institutional boundaries instantly. The subject's legal rights to challenge that data are fragmented and domain-specific. Subjects possess no legal right to contest the automated probabilistic join that fused their identity profile together. You cannot appeal an algorithm's assumption that you are the sum of those records. Identity resolution is the inescapable perimeter fence of the modern world. Once the identity is resolved and the master index is built, the subject cannot outrun their classification. With the subject identified, the system requires continuous surveillance. This is supplied by an ambient human sensorium, parole officers, clinicians, and landlords, all feeding a constant stream of reports back into the master index. But the architecture does not process all data equally. It is governed by format-discriminated memory. Adverse data, an arrest without a conviction, a missed payment, a curfew violation, is highly structured. It is standardized and instantly portable across commercial networks. Mitigating data operates differently.
The context for a violation, a sickness, a late bus, or a clerical error, is recorded as unstructured narrative text in a case note. This side-by-side flow shows the mechanical result. The data pipeline processes the structured red events, but it strips the context of the blue text. The human reasons for a failure do not serialize into the database, rendering them invisible to downstream algorithms. The adverse profile globally thickens across multiple institutions, while the mitigating profile perishes locally in an unread file. The system does not explicitly decide that human context doesn't matter. It simply decides that context doesn't fit the required format. To see all these scales operating simultaneously, we can look at the city of Chicago. An algorithmic inference becomes state coercion at a specific threshold, the moment a predictive risk score is coupled to the provisioning of real-world affordances.
In 2013, the Chicago Police Department maintained a predictive policing instrument called the Strategic Subject List. It flagged a 22-year-old man named Robert McDaniel. Despite having no violent criminal record, the algorithm scored him in the 99.9th percentile for potential involvement in a shooting. The score triggered a custom notification. Uniformed police officers and social workers arrived together at his front door. They offered clinical help while simultaneously warning him that the department would be closely monitoring his movements. The fallout was social. Neighbors watched police officers repeatedly visit McDaniel's home without ever arresting him. In that environment, they drew a logical inference. He had to be a police informant. His destroyed social standing isolated him, escalated local tensions, and resulted in him being shot. This mechanism is known as epistemic enclosure. The predictive model triggered a police intervention. The intervention caused the violence. That violence was then recorded as mathematical proof that the initial risk score was correct. The algorithmic system did not fail Robert McDaniel. It functioned as designed, demonstrating that adverse classifications manufacture the very outcomes they claim to merely predict. What happens to this massive architecture of measurement when the public reform programs that authorized it are shut down? The system experiences differential decay. Political mandates and legal protections die rapidly. Data ledgers, registries, and identity graphs are effectively immortal. Look at the Federal Interagency Reentry Council, a body tasked with coordinating support for supervised persons. By operation of its own built-in termination clause, the council expired in March 2021. In that exact same window, January 2021, the Chan-Zuckerberg Initiative formally announced the divestment of its criminal justice advocacy portfolio. While the public covenants and funding for help evaporate, the scoring engines and data brokers remain. Differential decay is the mechanism of systemic invisibility. The institutions stop helping long before they stop measuring. The United States operates a federated social credit equivalency system assembled from individually lawful components. This network executes meritocratic throttling. Independent institutions use interoperable data to continuously accelerate or dampen a person's velocity through society, restricting opportunity based on past outputs. Throttling creates a downward spiral. A downranked person faces increased observation and restricted mobility, denying them access to the exact resources, like housing and employment, required to ever generate a favorable score. A specific legal blind spot protects this ecosystem. Under current American due process doctrine, reputational harm inflicted by the state is not a constitutional injury unless it is coupled with the removal of a recognized right. The invisible prison is legally permissible because the state frames algorithmic exclusion as a lack of acceleration, rather than a removal of liberty. In an architecture of differential velocity, simple lack of physical restriction is no longer enough to define freedom. Freedom requires a new definition. It is the protected capacity to generate new evidence about oneself, the ability to act in unanticipated ways, and to escape a stale algorithmic classification without being punished for the surprise. A system that optimizes only for total predictability is no longer an instrument of justice. The prison is no longer a physical place you walk into. Its walls are rendered at runtime.